Children who live in a household with domestic violence occurrences are at a very high risk of being negatively impacted in a variety of ways. Are we doing enough to stop this matter from happening as much as possible? And specifically, are the people who are designated to stop this cycle and help when it is needed, that being police, doing enough to stop and help in these instances? Numerous studies have shown that children are very negatively impacted by domestic violence occurrences in their household in many ways. Carrie Moylan et al. States in her research that both male and female children were at a high risk of both internalizing behaviors like depression and anxiety and externalizing behaviors like violence. Cindy Sousa et al. Discusses that both experiencing domestic violence and being exposed to it can greatly increase a child's chances of developing antisocial behaviors. Emma Katz does her research on control-based abuse, which is a non-physical form of domestic violence, and she states that this type of abuse can increase children's likelihood of developing depression and anxiety. Sarah Turner et al. Based her research on a sleep study in Ontario. Her findings suggested that children who were living in an abusive household had a much harder time falling asleep and staying asleep. It's a known fact that lack of sleep alone can cause a range of emotional and behavioral problems in itself. For these children, it is likely that it will magnify the symptoms of the problems the children likely already have due to the household they are living in. So what does all of this research show us? It shows us that we must take the matter of domestic violence seriously and hold officers accountable for providing proper care and resources to the children and victims. It is very evident from these four authors' findings that instances of domestic violence have a very large negative impact on children, and sadly, there is no end-all be-all to put a halt on domestic violence. However, there are many steps officers can take in order to prevent this from happening in the future and provide information and assistance in getting the children and victims out of this situation. Ira W. Hutchison et al.'s research is a little bit different than the other four authors mentioned earlier. Her research focuses on how or if children have an effect on domestic violence occurrences in a household. It was found that they do not. Domestic violence is just as likely to occur when a child is present versus when they are not present. The main topic that I would like to focus on from Hutchison et al.'s research is that in instances where the police were called, officers did not act any differently if children were or were not present in their procedures of handling the situation. They were slightly more likely to give the mother, regularly the victim, some resources on the battered women's shelter, but never offered them transportation to get there or any other helpful information. From Hutchison et al.'s research study, it is clear that officers are not trained well in the field of handling domestic violence instances as well as they should be. It would be much safer for children and victims if they were provided more information and resources to remove themselves from the situation. Switching gears a bit, it's not new news that many instances of domestic violence are not reported and go without ever being reported. Gaps in research from this author could show that domestic violence happens more often than the research shows. Ira W. Hutchison et al. States that the research was limited to only women who were more likely to leave their abusive partners. It's not shocking that many of these situations go unreported and unstudied due to the victims being too afraid to speak out or not knowing how to. That means that there are a multitude of households enduring domestic violence that no one knows about, and that are not getting the proper access to resources to get help. This further reiterates the claim that officers need to be better trained in order to give the maximum amount of help they can to the violent households they do encounter. They need to be better trained to provide proper care, resources, and transportation to people in households of domestic violence. Especially with what's going on right now already with police brutality, it is very clear that police need to be trained in a variety of fields, including how to handle instances of domestic violence and properly provide resources and transportation for help. Children are our future, and without them getting the proper care and resources they need, they will not be able to thrive in our society the way they deserve to.